Now, Lincoln owns Practical Ecology and knows the area well. He owns property and has done several reports. He's an independent expert providing information to enlighten the community on ecological matters.
The first issue I want to talk about, and Kane brought up this issue, it's a really unique area for groundwater. And the issue about groundwater is very unique in that, as you can easily imagine, it's hidden below the surface. So the data we have on groundwater tends to be from sparse and far between. So every bore, there's bores across a landscape and so on, but we often don't know much about groundwater. And that's one of the big problems, and the mine should be held to account to investigate the groundwater in great detail. Now, what I've done just to introduce these simple points is I accessed a website with this map that you see here. You see Lindenau to the right, Bragalong to the far left, and the text, it's a groundwater dependent ecosystems atlas. So it's developed by the Bureau of Meteorology, and on large scale data, it's modeling. This first map simply shows the streams that are probably reliant on groundwater. Australian streams are actually quite difficult sometimes because you'll see them flow, but you sometimes can't be sure without lots of investigation and data. Is the water flow from surface runoff, or is it coming out of an aquifer? What this map tells us is most of the streams flowing into the Mitchell are probably reliant on underground aquifers, on groundwater. And if you have an impact on aquifers, then you'll have an impact on the reliable flow of water and streams and the aquatic environment and all the native flora and fauna that live there. So this is one source of data we get from. So this is aquatic streams. This one is about terrestrial. Now, terrestrial is again, it's something that we don't see very easily, because we see vegetation that remains above the ground and it looks dry quite often, but it can actually rely on groundwater. The red gums across the plains might be this kind of feature, and we know even less about this sometimes. So you can see on this map that a lot of the remnant vegetation in the mine footprint nearby is deemed to be groundwater dependent. It means that it relies on an aquifer and groundwater relatively close to the surface. And if that aquifer is disturbed, it's very problematic. Now, I introduced this, really, it's just an introduction to say there should be a high bar. We need to really get clear with Gippsland Critical Minerals that and the government and so on, that intense investigation of groundwater is really important to consider, so we understand the impacts of the mining. So that's one key issue. And really, I don't have too much to say about it, except we have some data, but we know it's a huge issue for indigenous flora and fauna. Let me flow on now to my second big point, which is what hasn't changed about the proposal. The proposal, from my reading online, is it's 27% less. So it's still pretty substantial. It was 1,300 hectares to begin with 5 years ago. It's 27% less, so maybe it's 800 or 900 hectares. That's still a lot of ground. And what has not changed, this map I'm showing you is maps of remnant vegetation. I couldn't find a map of endangered vegetation, but as the Gippsland Plains has been extensively cleared for farming in the past, the remnant veg that remains is quite significant, usually of endangered EVCs. This is endangered is a term created by the state government to describe different vegetation types. If an ecological vegetation class is deemed endangered, it means less than 10% of what was here when Europeans arrived still remains. And the majority of the native vegetation, the analysis of the detailed proposal that failed was that most of the EVCs were endangered. That will not have changed. There isn't, there is no new remnant vegetation here. It's the same vegetation. It's endangered and it's still at risk. One of the key values, of course, and those of you who know the territory will be familiar with this, is the big old hollow-bearing trees. Hollow-bearing trees are really quite important because most indigenous, it's quite amazing how many indigenous species of fauna need hollow-bearing trees. Something like 50% of all mammal species, a third of all bird species, even 15% of all reptile species in Australia need hollow-bearing trees, need hollows in trees. So if this local area is quite significant for the abundant large hollow-bearing trees, and that's what cannot be replaced except with hundreds of years of time, if with any restoration. So that's a big point to make there. I'll make a point now too. I always like to repeat this point, meeting some of the, met a few of the farmers when I was working on this project as an expert witness 4 or 5 years ago. And share the disgust about the agricultural land was called most of moderate value. Well, a bunch of farmers have made a living off of this difficult. It's not the easiest land to farm. A lot of what's left in cleared paddocks is native grass, and a lot of people have made a living in this difficult environment with a lot of skill. And a mine will erase a lot of that heritage and that the representation of that skill. Now, I'll make one more point about the rarity about clearing native veg too, is that too often government politicians and proponents of projects like this mining go straight to offsetting. But let me be clear, and if I present again, I'll say the same thing. The obligation in the planning scheme and under an ES is to avoid and minimize vegetation losses first, in quantity and in quality. So if you've got rarer vegetation, the test is not that you can offset. The test in the planning system is it reasonable to clear this habitat? Well, it might not be reasonable, and the first obligation is to avoid clearing it. The second obligation is to minimize your clearing. So, and offsetting is only an option if it's reasonable to clear the native veg. That's how the planning scheme is worded, and that's also how various precedents like VCAT cases and EESs and so on that have reinforced. So that'll be an important point along the way of working on this, to understand the impacts of the mining. Now, the last thing I'll say, here's a couple excerpts of the little bit they say on their website. They say a little bit of restoration and rehabilitation will be done. They don't detail any particular area. Here's another bit. They give us a nice picture of kangaroo grass and speargrass. Also say they'll restore some native vegetation. I note on their website that Paul Gibson Roy is still a consultant, that they still are working on developing a seed orchard at a nursery. I forget where it is, but it's still running apparently. What I want to say about this is the same thing I said as an expert witness at the hearings, is restoration is good if you do allow mining, but it doesn't replace what was there. It cannot replace large hollow-bearing trees. Only time does that. It does not replace good quality remnant sites. because the disturbance that comes from digging up the dirt and then putting it back means there's no soil there, there's no seeds there, there's even lots of nutrients that accumulate, and restoration sort of works. You can get something that maybe given time sort of resembles what you cleared, but it isn't, it's a pale imitation. And it is a better outcome for nature than usually in mining. The obligation is to take it back to agricultural land. So the mining company will be looking at this and being a bit saying, yeah, we're being generous, including restoring native vegetation. It's not usually a requirement. But also in a sense, it's a bit of greenwashing. Like I say, it's not, you can't really recreate remnant vegetation and all its diversity and power and so on. And they want us to think that, oh, well, they'll be doing some restoration and we'll get some nature back. But it won't be what was lost, to put it simply. So those are my three big points for tonight. I have a feeling I'll have more to say over time as more detail comes out, because there's been very little detail, new information about the impacts of the mine. I've really said all these things already in the last 10 minutes here. But my summary comments just to say, there'll be other ecological issues that arise, of course, through time. But in my 10 or 15 minutes, I think I've made some key points about the big issues. So I'll finish there.